Welcome to the Herald Democrat Sports Podcast. I'm the sports editor of the Herald Democrat, Jason Del Rosa, and you're listening to the latest edition of the Herald Democrat Sports Podcast. We have done it. We have hit the final week of the high school football season. Week 11 is upon us. So we will talk about everything that happened on a wet and rainy and windy Friday night in Week 10, what it means to set up for the final games of the regular season, who's in, who's out, who's playing for seeding, all that matters as we get ready for the playoffs starting next week. It's crazy. I've said it a couple times this season, how fast the season actually flies by. But here we are, the last week of the season, and we got plenty to talk about here on the Herald Democrat Sports Podcast. And as we always do, we will start from the top and we will work our way to the bottom, with one exception this week, because we have Thursday games, and I will preface everything that I say in this podcast. If games get changed after this podcast, you will know, because when you listen to the podcast, I will be talking about them on Friday. So double check as the week goes on. There have been some changes already made when this was recorded. I'm sure there's probably a game or two that's going to get moved along the way, just based off of the fact that I think a lot of people did not want to deal with bad weather for the second week in a row. And as we'll talk about, some of these games do have some significance in terms of seeding, in terms of playoffs. So there are a couple Thursday games that I will mention specifically as I go over the weekly lineup. But just make sure if you are hearing a game that I talk about on Friday that has been moved to Thursday and you feel like you need to double check, please do that. I don't want you thinking that the game is on Friday, but unfortunately we gotta broadcast and we gotta record this at some point, and there's a chance, much like last week, there will be some games that will change after this podcast comes out or after it gets recorded. So just keep that in mind as we talk about the games. And so since that's the case, we'll talk about one of the Thursday games that's going to be this week, and that is the Denison Yellow Jackets in District 7-5A Division 2. They are hosting Mesquite Poteet at 7 o'clock on this Thursday at Munson Stadium. That was a regularly scheduled Thursday night game. That's part of the new thing that's become a trend the last couple of years, especially at some of the at the higher levels and classifications, is people are playing their last game on a Thursday so that they get an extra day to prepare for a potential playoff game the next week, especially because of the way the setup is, where at the larger levels you have to travel to your opponent. There's not a neutral site. It allows you to scout. There's a lot of benefits to it, and a lot of people have started to go to that. And Denison's district is one of them. Three of the four games were scheduled for Thursday, and the Melissa Lovejoy game was one of them, and they moved that back to Friday because Melissa had to play on Saturday because of the weather last week. Of course, this week it's supposed to rain on Friday, so who knows if we end up going back to playing that on Thursday as well, or maybe that gets pushed to another Saturday. Unfortunately, the weather has, which was so good the whole season, has unfortunately become a factor the last couple of weeks, and you'll see that when we talk about some of the games from last week and the final scores and how we got to those final scores is pretty evident that weather did play a factor. The Denison game last week, they lost against Crandall 54-30, so they are 4-5 and 2-4 overall, and Mesquite Poteet lost 42-7 against Terrell. They are 2-7 and 2-4 in district as well. So both of the teams have been eliminated from the playoffs. We had a chance. We talked about this last week. This had a chance for a winner is in, a loser goes home. Unfortunately, the matchups did not work out the way that either of them hoped, and so Crandall clinched the third seed with a victory over Denison last week, and Terrell clinched the last playoff spot and the fourth seed by virtue of its victory over Mesquite Poteet. So this is a pride game, which is unfortunate if you're for either one of these programs. I think if you're Denison, you've gone to the playoffs the last couple of years, even though there were a lot of changes, especially on both sides of the ball. at some key spots that you thought, hey, maybe they can still find a way to get to the playoffs, start off 3-1, and unfortunately, the way things that are potentially going to finish are, if they win this week against Mesquite Poteet, you're going to beat the 3 teams below you in the standings, and you'll end up losing the 4 games to the teams in front of you. So you end up right where your play dictates that you are. You're the winner of this is trying to be the 5th best team, and unfortunately that means that you're the first team out of the playoffs if that's the case. The other question about this game from a Denison standpoint, will we see Josh Kurtenbach at quarterback as he tries to close out his career with one more game? He was knocked out of the Crandall game after a hard hit, was put in concussion protocols. So that obviously, with one less game, or with one less day to potentially recover from that may be a situation where we don't see him. And of course, that would fall to Ty Rhodes, who filled in last week. And you look at what Denison did in this game against Crandall. This was a game that was delayed over an hour because of lightning and in the area. Steady rain the whole game. But still, if you look at the numbers, you sit there and say, Denison had over 400 yards of offense, 234 rushing, 213 passing. Again, with your backup quarterback playing essentially 2.5 quarters. Big games from Jack Allman, 21 carries, 167 yards, 2 touchdowns. Kyson Lusain, again, another productive week for the wide receiver. 6 catches, 129 yards, and 2 touchdowns. He caught one from Kurtenbach early, and then one from Ty Rhodes late. So Kurtenbach, he got hurt. He had 10 carries for 58 yards, was 2 of 4 passing for 69 yards and a touchdown. Rhodes ended up going 8 of 18 for 144 yards and the touchdown. Also had 2 fumbles. One was on a sack. One was on a backwards pass trying to throw a screen. And Coach Whitson said after the game, all things considered, when you look at this game and you say, you're not really expecting to play because obviously you have a senior quarterback who's been on a roll, has been super hot. The last month of his run, throwing the ball well, running the ball well, running the offense, which has not been a problem for 3 of the 4 losses in district play, and he's running up the middle, gets hit hard, taken down to the turf. It was a clean hit, just a hard hit, and the back of his head hit the turf, and it's the middle of the second quarter, and it's a close game, and you're not thinking, oh, I'm going to go in, or oh, hey, this game that is so important to our season, and it's raining, and it's windy, and it's everything going on. All things considered, he made some really good throws, spread the ball around. I think the pocket awareness was something that he had to deal with, and of course we talked about Crandall's got a linebacker who's going to Oklahoma, and he made his presence known, not just on offense where he had 3 touchdown catches, but significantly in defensively. He was all over the place, making plays. He got the strip sack. He forced a lot of things, and you had to account for him wherever he was. And so obviously that's the big question for Denison is are you going to have more of a sneak peek of potentially what next year might look like with Ty Rhodes, or is Josh Kurtenbach going to be able to make his final appearance as a Denison Yellow Jacket in one of what's going to end up being one of the top 5 or 6 passing seasons by a Denison quarterback, which a month ago you probably would not have thought that, but he's turned into a true dual threat. He's got double-digit touchdowns on the ground. He's obviously had great success getting the ball to Lusain and Ty Kirkbride as the top 2 receivers, and so you hope he's healthy enough to be able to get out there, and obviously for both sides, you just want to see the effort, the pride, the underclassmen doing what you would hope they would, you would like them to see playing a game and then going into an off season to get ready for next year and to find a way to finish. If you're the team that finishes fifth, how do we get to fourth place? How do we get to third place? Obviously the top two spots with Lovejoy and Melissa are going to be tough. But then if you're Denison, you played Melissa, not knowing what the Lovejoy-Melissa outcome is going to be. You played Melissa as tough as anybody has played them. So you might not be as far off as some people might think you would be. So we'll see what happens. Hopefully they're able to put something together and end the season on a positive note. And that is a 7:00 start on Thursday. So be aware of that if you're going to go watch Denison at Munson Stadium to end the season. Another matchup where you have two teams that will be playing for pride, wanting to end on a positive note. You have the Sherman Bearcats going to play Frisco Liberty in the 6-5A Division I finale. This is at 7:00 on Friday, and they're not worried about the weather because they are playing in the Star. So there's no reason to worry about this game getting moved because we'll be inside. And this is Sherman, who is 3-6 and 2-5 in district play. They won last week 33-28 against Frisco Wakeland, and Frisco Liberty comes in at 0-9 and 0-7 in district play after they lost 37-23 against Frisco Lebanon Trail. So we talked last week. Sherman, you gonna be a spoiler? Are you gonna hang your head after being eliminated? And the Bearcats said no. The Bearcats said we are going to try to do everything we can to make life miserable for Frisco Wakeland, which they certainly did, with a big second half, down 14-6 at halftime, and they score 4 times in the second half to build a lead going to the fourth quarter, and they're able to hang on in the swamp that is Bearcat Stadium. It was muddy, it was rainy, it was everything you would expect for playing a game in that stadium and using that home field advantage. If this game had been played in Frisco, you're talking about playing on any of those surfaces or turf, or if this would have been at the Star last week, you're talking about inside, so the elements are not a factor. Sherman plays on grass. Sherman plays outside in all types of weather. They could have moved this game up to Thursday. They did not, and that's certainly part of their right as the home team. And that decision paid off. They were able to win a game that I'm sure a lot of people, it caught them by surprise because Wakeland was battling Lone Star for that last playoff spot. They had a chance. If Wakeland had won based on all the results from last week, they could be tied for second place right now if they would have been able to beat Sherman like the teams in front of them were able to do this year, and they weren't able to do that. And so you have a Sherman squad, puts up its second most points of the season, gets touchdowns from a lot of areas. Kane Bowen had a big game on the ground, 18 carries, 113 yards, and a touchdown. Phoenix Grant, 9 carries, 70 yards, and a touchdown. Also chipped in 6 catches for 72 yards. Caleb Orr had a pair of touchdown runs. Sherman ran, surprisingly, and I could say this about a lot of games this past Friday, considering the weather conditions, a lot of people threw the ball a lot, which I thought was interesting because I figured, there are some games that we will talk about where neither team has a passing yard. And I would have figured people would be running the ball every play, 60 yards, because wet ball, the wind, just bad conditions all around. But a lot of people threw the ball, and you look at Sherman, they ended up throwing the ball 25 times. They ran it 41 times though for 203 yards. Caleb Orr with 155 yards passing did have a touchdown pass to Vontrell Sanders to kick off the scoring. And like we said, Sherman's able to hang on, get a positive result, and you have them going into this game, that we were hoping if things would have gone well down the stretch, if they had been able to beat Lone Star, keep it close, you're facing a team that probably wants its season to end. They haven't won a game. They haven't really been close in any of their games, and that would have been very nice for you to just have to beat them to maybe win or get some help. But it would be pretty easy on your end because you think that you would be able to handle an 0-9, 0-7 team. And so if you're Sherman, I know they're over there talking about, hey, if you beat Wakeland, you should go out and be able to beat Frisco Liberty. I think unfortunately the recap of Sherman's season is going to be how many close games did we have, starting with the Battle of the Axe and all the way through, and how different, they could easily be. They're sitting here at 3-6. They could easily be 6-3. They're 2-5 in district. They could easily be 4-3 in district and playing for a playoff spot. They've had so many close games, so many games decided by a touchdown or less, and that's kind of been the story of their season. But here you have them going into this game where they can finish, 2 straight wins, go into the off season, and really look at it and say, man, if we do a drive here or a drive there, that totally changes our season. And they can say that about 4 or 5 games. So it's good to be that close, but you also lament the fact that you are that close, and a couple of games would have been the difference in getting to the playoffs. But it's perfectly set up for them to go and get to 4-6. We say this about Denison. Talking with Coach Whitson, he said, 5 and even though we don't have a lot to play for in terms of the playoffs and past this final game, they do have a chance to finish 5-5, and 5-5 sounds a lot better than 4-6, and 3-7, 4-6 sounds a lot better than 3-7 if you're Sherman. So I think that's obviously a really good selling point. The seniors had a really good senior night with all of that going on last week with the weather and everything, and you have a chance to go out with a win. And I don't know how excited Frisco Liberty is going to be about this game. And Sherman's had very good success against Frisco Liberty. They've never lost to Liberty. The last time they played a couple years ago, the game I did, really dominated from start to finish. So we'll see, but maybe if you're Liberty and I don't know, I haven't looked at their roster to see how many senior starters they have or anything like that, but are they excited to finish with a win? I'm just been a trying season for them, obviously, without being winless. Maybe they're going to make one final stand and put up a really good fight. But you're in a good spot if you're Sherman. So hopefully things will end on a positive note for both the local 5As as they go into their off season after this week. I will talk quickly about the team that is not playing this week. We mentioned last week Van Alstyne was playing their last game because they have the district bye this week in 5-4A Division II. They went out and dominated from the start against Gainesville, 65-18, and that locked up the second seed for the Panthers. We said the winner of that game was going to get the second seed, and the loser was, if it was Van Alstyne, was going to get the third seed. The crazy thing, of course, for Gainesville is that because of who they finished with, that being Crum, even though they are in third place and there's only one game left, there is a scenario, depending on what happens, that they could not make the playoffs. So that was a really big game for them. We talked about that. Van Alstyne could afford the loss if they needed to. But now you have Gainesville at 3-2, and you have Sanger and Crum are both sitting there at 2-3. So we could have a 3-way tie for third place depending on the outcomes, because Gainesville plays Crum this week, and Sanger, I believe, has Bridgeport. They do, and Bridgeport it has been eliminated from that because if I guess Bridgeport technically needs a lot of help. But if Gainesville wins and Sanger wins, then they would clinch the last 2 spots. I guess there's a permutation where they could tie Sanger and Crum, and then that would get messy. So we'd have to see how that ends up playing out. But there's a good chance there could be a 3-way tie if Gainesville loses to Crum, and so that's why it was so big for Gainesville last week. And the weather, as we sort of thought, would not affect Van Alstyne because they've been a running team this whole year, and that did not change at all. They ran for 449 yards, only threw it 3 times, had 1 completion for 30 yards, but they didn't need it. They jumped up 21-0 after the first quarter. They were up 51-12 at halftime, and were able to cruise from there. The duo of Jaden Mahan and Dakota Howard got things done in this one. Mahan, 15 carries, 226 yards, and 3 touchdowns. Howard, 13 carries, 182 yards, and 4 touchdowns. Shane McCaslin added a touchdown run. Jackson Allen did as well. But it was short and sweet and pretty much over. So they got the second seed. They end at 6-4 and 5-1, with the only loss being to Aubrey, which of course there's no shame in losing to Aubrey the way that program has been recently. So they're going to play the third seed out of 6-4A Division II, and they are going to have to wait till after this week to sort all that out to find out who they're going to play. So they're just hanging out, waiting to see what happens, and who they're going to get in the playoffs. But again, I think considering where they were going into district play, they were sitting at 1-3. They had played some tough teams, but obviously they're going to take. At that point they would have, if you would have said, hey, they're going to beat everybody but Aubrey. And for the most part, most of those games they've been able to control them pretty well. I think obviously it's a good showing in district for Van Alstyne. They won a couple rounds last year. Obviously we'll have to see what things look like from a bracket standpoint. But obviously you would imagine with a lot of the key guys from last year, that's the goal. Can we get a couple rounds deep again this year as well? So Van Alstyne is the lone team that is not playing this week because they have the district bye to end the season. So we'll slide down to the 3A level, and the first game that we will talk about there is the Whitesboro Bearcats traveling to Ponder in 4-3A Division I. Whitesboro is 7-1 overall, 4-1 in district play. They won last week 18-7 against Paradise, and Ponder is 3-6 and 0-5. They lost 74-27 against Brock, and so nothing is at stake for either of these teams. Ponder has been eliminated, and by virtue of the win last week, as we talked about, the key matchup with Paradise, the winner was going to be the 2nd seed, the loser was going to be the 3 seed, and because Paradise has the bye this week, and so Whitesboro locked in 2nd seed, only lost obviously to Brock on a close play at the end. It's the only thing that's kept them from having a perfect record so far in the season, and they're taking on a Ponder team that is very high scoring, but also gives up a ton of yards and points. And it's going to be interesting to see from their perspective, how excited are they. At this point, they had some early games in district that I think that were super close. They lost some close games, single digits, the last possession, that sort of thing, to kind of keep them in the mix. There is Boyd and Pilot Point are tied for 4th. Peaster is a game back, so if you were in that mix, if you had won 1 or 2 of those games, if you were Ponder, you would have been in the mix. So, but if you're Whitesboro, obviously you're locked in. It's going to be interesting to see how they handle this game. Obviously, you don't want guys to get hurt. So it doesn't mean anything in terms of seeding or how to line up in the bracket. You do want to finish strong. And I don't know if it matters the way, last week was a very low scoring game. All the scoring came in the second quarter. That's kind of weird that there were 4 touchdowns in this game. They all came in the second quarter. Grayson Ledbetter led the way for the Bearcats, 32 carries, 206 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Mac Harper, 7 of 10 passing, 72 yards, 19 carries for 73 yards. Also had a touchdown pass of 32 yards to Jay Sanders. That was his lone catch. And so Whitesboro gets up 18-0, and then Paradise scores right before the half on a 43-yard pass, but that's it. Stoned them the other quarters. Actually, for the game, when you look at it, Paradise only had 124 yards of offense total, and Whitesboro was able just to kind of grind it out, keep the ball on the ground, and get out of there with a win, considering the elements that the game is being played in. So Whitesboro's done what they've done, needed to do, the whole year long. They've had some close games in non-district that got them ready. Obviously, the Brock game could have gone either way there at the end. And they're in prime position to put together another deep run, which is what I think, they were assuming they were going to do all year long. So, but it'll be interesting to see how they handle it in some of these other games that we're going to talk about, how teams that are locked into whatever spot they're in, how they're going to handle these final games that don't mean anything in terms of seeding or playoffs or anything like that. The next game we're going to talk about, however, does not have any issues with being of great importance, and this might end up being viewed as the game of the week for teams in this area, as Pottsboro travels to Mount Vernon in District 5 3A Division I action. This is 8-1 Pottsboro, 5-0 in district play. Mount Vernon is 8-1 and 4-1. Pottsboro just moved into the top 10 in the statewide rankings this week. They won last week 31-14 against Commerce, and Mount Vernon did not play. They had the district bye. So we have several intriguing thoughts on that. So obviously, Mount Vernon had 2 weeks to get healthy, get ready. Maybe they got out of rhythm. You have Pottsboro, and they didn't have to play in the rain, so that's good for them, I guess. And if you're Pottsboro, you had a slow start last week against a feisty Commerce team that's tied for fourth place, trying to gain a little bit of separation. Of course, it wasn't going to matter because they play Mineola, so even if they were a game ahead, they would still have to beat them in this last game to get that final spot in the district standings. And Mount Vernon comes into this one trying to force a three-way tie for first place, tri-champions of the district between Pottsboro, Mount Vernon, and Winsboro, who has the bye this week. So they're done and in the clubhouse at 5-1. And so it's pretty simple. If Pottsboro wins, they go to 6-0 and they win the outright district championship, get the top seed for the playoffs. Mount Vernon, if they lose, they would get the third seed for the playoffs, and obviously that makes Winsboro the second seed. But if Mount Vernon ends up winning, we have the three-way tie. Winsboro ends up getting the top seed based on point differential. They beat Mount Vernon, and they only lost to Pottsboro by 1. So right now Pottsboro is only +1, and then if they lose to Mount Vernon, they'll be in the negative. So Pottsboro could go from potentially the number 1 seed, which they currently hold, and have a chance to control their destiny for that. They could end up dropping all the way down to the 3 seed. So big stakes, in this one. And we mentioned so last week Pottsboro was down 14-7 at halftime. Like I said, against a Commerce team that is trying to fight for a playoff spot. But they do turn it on. This was a game where we did not have any passing yards. Commerce goes 0 for 3 on passing. Pottsboro goes 0 for 2. It makes you wonder, one, did that change the approach in this game? Now Pottsboro still ran for 455 yards. And they had their normal big guns in the backfield. Major McBride did his thing, and Haylin Flanagan had a really huge game running the ball instead of mixing in the pass. But I wonder if that contributed to the fact that obviously Pottsboro is very balanced. They get big plays in the passing game, and this was one of those games you couldn't do that because of the weather situations. So you just kind of had to stick with keeping it on the ground, and maybe that shortened the game a little bit and allowed Commerce to hang around. But Flanagan did run 25 times, 216 yards, and 3 touchdowns. McBride, 22 carries, 113 yards, and a touchdown as well. Connor McDonald kicked a field goal in the fourth quarter to help extend things. So it's just one of those. It may have been just one of those games. It just may have been that's an outcome that may have been tampered by the weather. And it's going to be interesting, obviously, what the weather might potentially be like in this one as well. Going out to the east, though, So maybe that's a situation where the weather is not much of a factor out that way, as opposed to if Pottsboro was hosting this game. So, but it's a huge game. Like I said, you could have a three-way tie for first place, or if you're Pottsboro, you've got a chance to be the outright district champion and get the top seed. So that is obviously one to watch. That is obviously going to have a huge effect on the 3A Region 2 bracket in Division 1. Because I think all three of those teams, obviously, when you look at Winsboro, who's 9-1, 5-1, Pottsboro 8-1, 5-0, Mount Vernon 8-1, 4-1. They've all been ranked in the top 10 in the state. Having one be on your side of the bracket, having two of those be on your side of the bracket, because one would be the 2 and one would be the 3, that could really change some fortunes in the bracket depending on how things end up shaking out. So that is definitely one to watch, even though it's on the road. Pottsboro is going to be going on the road to play Mount Vernon in that key 5-3A Division 1 game. Going down to Division 2, we will start over in 6-3A Division 2, and S&S goes on the road to City View. S&S is 1-8 and 0-4 after it lost 44-13 against Henrietta. City View played one of those games where you look at the final score and you say, well, that's a muddy battle that came down to one really good series by Holiday, and that was only a 3-0 win for Holiday, who is obviously their defense has been really good, but their offense, they've been killing people, and that was a close game. That would have been a shocking outcome had Holiday not won that game. But you have a situation where S&S has been eliminated from the playoffs. City View is locked in as the 3rd seed. So not a lot of movement happening in this game. S&S trying to finish on a positive note. Got a little bit going offensively last week. They're a team that probably liked mucking it up. They did run for over 200 yards. Had close to 300 yards of offense. Chase Sloan, 35 carries, 151 yards, and has scored both of the touchdowns. Brett Stewart, 13 carries for 65 yards, also threw for 78 yards. Garrett Wise with 3 catches for 49 yards in that one. And again, it's a game where S&S scores the first touchdown. They're up. It's 7-0 in the second quarter, but unfortunately they weren't able to hang with Henrietta. Who comes puts things away by the end of the third quarter, where it's, I guess that's 32-13, no, or 36-13 after 3 quarters, and so Henrietta stays alive. We talked about that last week. The winner of this game was going to stay alive. The losers was going to be out, and Valley View ends up playing Henrietta. For the final playoff spot. The winner advances as the 4 seed. The loser goes home. So, obviously, like we said, Henrietta had a lot to play for, just as much as S&S last week to try to stay in the mix. So, if you're the Rams, you're going to go on the road, hopefully try to get some positive momentum going into the offseason, and try to build on something. Like I said, this is a district where when you look at it on the surface, all you got to, 2 wins could get you in. And there's a chance that if things work out, you could have the 3rd and the 4th place team only have 2 wins in district play, because first is right now is a tie between Holiday and Calsburg. Both are 4-0 playing each other. The winner's going to win the district and the loser's going to be the runner-up. So it's a district that everybody can go into the season competing for a playoff spot. So if you're S&S next year, depending on if you're able to beat City View, then you kind of look at it and say, we only got to beat one more team. Can we find a way to do that to at least get in the mix for a playoff spot? So the Rams will be ending their season with a road trip out to Wichita Falls to take on City View in 6-3A Division 2 action on Friday night. We'll get into 8-3A Division 2. This is where we had a couple of the games that have already been moved. All of the games have significance some way or another, and we'll start with the team that is looking for another undefeated district run. That's the Gunner Tigers. They're traveling to Blue Ridge. Gunner 8-0, 4-0 in district play. Blue Ridge is Gunner won last week 56-0 against Leonard, and Blue Ridge is 5-4 and 2-2. They won 42-21 against Howe. And we'll probably talk more about this when we talk about Howe, but that was a huge game because in this case it clinched a playoff spot for Blue Ridge. So Blue Ridge is in. They're trying to play for seeding. Gunner is locked in as the number 1 seed. Even if they end up losing and end up potentially in a tie with Bells for the top spot, they have the tiebreaker. So they're already locked in for the number 1. Blue Ridge, like I said, playing for seeding. They're either going to be if they lose, they're either going to be the 3 or the 4. If they win, they could have a chance. There could be a 3-way tie there. There's a lot of maneuvering in this district as we'll talk about with each game. But so if you're Gunner, you're probably just going to want to keep doing what you do. You won last week 56-0 against Leonard. It's 28-0 after the first quarter. It was 49-0 at halftime. Ran for 372 yards on 36 carries. Again, this was another game that was weather affected in terms of passing. Each side was 1 of 2 passing. Leonard had 0 passing yards on that completion, and Gunner's was actually an 18-yard touchdown from Walker Overman to Cole Harpole, but mostly keep it on the ground, get the game over with type of a deal, and that's what Gunner does. Ivy Hellman leads the way in this one, 6 carries, 99 yards, and 3 touchdowns. Ethan Sloan, 8 carries, 86 yards, and a couple touchdowns as well. Easton Overman, 3 carries, 60 yards, and a touchdown. Mitchell Gage also scored on the ground, and of course we mentioned the touchdown pass from Walker Overman to Harpole, and it was a game where they held Leonard to 49 yards, and that's that for Gunner. Again, this it might be interesting to see because you have 2 teams that are more or less locked into their spots. If you're Blue Ridge, how do you handle the fact that are you playing for something in terms of seeding, or do you just want guys healthy? And of course, if you're Gunner, they've been getting some guys back that have been hurt during the season. But again, it's all about making that long run. But again, you also, it's bad to say, but they've had a lot of games that have been over at halftime, much like last week. Coming off that Lone Oak game the week before, do you have to play guys for a half because, or even into the third quarter because you have to get them ready because now you're looking at, the playoffs are here and it's going to take all 4 quarters for most of these games to get back to where you want to the week before Christmas. So going to be interesting to see with Gunner and Blue Ridge. Like I said, there is something for Blue Ridge to play for in terms of seeding. And I guess if you are looking at it, if you want to avoid 4th place, because if you get it, you're on Gunner's side of the bracket. Although I could say if you get on the other side of the bracket, you're on potentially Bells' side of the bracket. And so we'll talk about them. The Bells Panthers go to visit Leonard. This also was a 7:30 game on Thursday, so Gunner and Bells moving their games up to Thursday. Both games are at 7:30 on Thursday, so be aware of that if that's a game you're going to go to. So Bells goes to Leonard. They're 7-2, 3-1. Leonard is 6-3 and 2-2. Bells won last week 78-26 against Lone Oak, and of course Leonard lost the 56-0 against Gunner. To hit the high points on Bells, Grady Waldrop, 4 carries, 130 yards, and 3 touchdowns. Brock Baker had 3 carries for 73 yards and a touchdown. He also caught a 48-yard touchdown pass and returned an interception for a touchdown. Spencer Hines, his lone carry was a 38-yard touchdown. He also had a 90-yard kickoff return for a touchdown. Bells had 453 yards rushing on only 28 carries. It was something crazy like they had scored the first 10 plays resulted in touchdowns or something crazy like that. And this was a game. It was 38-0 after the first quarter. It was like 72-13 at halftime. We talked about Lone Oak and the struggles that they've had. And we've seen that in the scores in this district and what some people have been able to do against them. So this game is huge for Bells and Leonard for a couple of reasons. If Bells wins, that would clinch the second seed. So that's huge for them. There is a chance, if you assume that Gunner is going to beat Blue Ridge, if you're Bells and you lose this game, you drop down to the third seed. And of course, there could be a three-way tie, which may, however, unlikely. If Leonard beats Bells and Blue Ridge beats Gunner, you'd have a three-way tie at second place, all at 3 and 2. Leonard is obviously have something to play for. They currently are in fourth place, or I guess technically they're tied for third, but they're the one team that is not going to playoff spot, and they need to win, because if they end up losing and end up in a head-to-head tie with Howe, they lose the tiebreaker to Howe. We'll get to Howe in a moment. But Leonard clinches a spot with a win or a Howe loss to Lone Oak, and we've talked about what Lone Oak is doing these days, and that's obviously not seeming very likely. Leonard gets eliminated with a loss and wins by Howe and Blue Ridge, or if Leonard loses, Howe wins and Blue Ridge loses. If there is a three-way tie between Blue Ridge, Leonard, and Howe, Leonard is out and Howe advances. And so that leads us into Howe going to Lone Oak. This game, like we said, Lone Oak doesn't mean anything for them. They're 0-9, they're 0-4, they're out of it. But if you're Howe, you're 5-4, you're 1-3. You had a chance to really, shore up your situation last week against Blue Ridge. If you would have won that game, you didn't. You lost 42-21. So you put it in the past. A couple numbers were good. You had Antoine Rattler, 20 carries for 100 yards. Austin Haley, 14 carries for 114 yards and 2 touchdowns. I wonder how much the rain played a factor in this one. Blue Ridge only threw one pass, was incomplete, while Haley was 5 of 12 for 100 yards and 2 interceptions, and that obviously is not, or excuse me, 1 interception, and so that's obviously not a very typical performance from him in the passing game, and it makes you wonder how much the weather played a factor. If that was a game that was played this week instead of last week, are we talking about how has locked up their spot? But they weren't able to do that, and now they're facing a situation where they need to win, because if they lose, they're going to be out, and Leonard's going to clinch. We touched on that in there, in those Leonard scenarios. I mean, it's pretty simple for Howe this week. You clinch a playoff spot with a win, a Blue Ridge loss to Gunner, and a Leonard loss to Bells. 3 scenarios that we can obviously see happening very well. You could clinch with a win, a Leonard loss, and a Blue Ridge win. And the only way it gets eliminated is if it loses. So obviously you have to win, or if Leonard and Blue Ridge both win. So you need 2 upsets that do not seem very likely. If Leonard were to beat Bells and Blue Ridge were to beat Blue Ridge were to beat Gunner, then that would knock Howe out. So, but you got to take care of business if you're Howe. You cannot afford to let a team like Lone Oak hang around. Obviously, they put up some points last week against Bells. Obviously, that's against backups and third string and that sort of thing. Late in the game, it's already out of hand. But they've had some moments, and I'm sure their coaching staff is saying, hey, look, you want to be a spoiler, you beat Howe and you spoil their season, and that would be obviously Howe's made great strides this year. Going from the back-to-back winless seasons, they've won 5 games, they have a chance to win 6 games, but you got to take care of your business and then hope that the other teams that you expect to take care of business do as well, and that would get you into the playoffs. So all 3 games in 8-3A matter to some degree, and so it's going to be interesting to see if Howe is able to get that final spot, like it looks like they should be able to. But again, you don't know what the weather's going to be like for that game. I don't know if that's been moved yet or not. Like I said, at the time of recording this, that game is still on Friday. Those other games moved on Thursday, so if that game stays on Friday, How we'll know what it needs, they'll know, hey, we just got to go win because the other results will have taken place. So they won't be scoreboard watching, or checking the apps to see what's going on in the other games. You'll know on Thursday what is the outcome of Bells Leonard, what is the outcome of Gunner Blue Ridge, and then you'll know, hey, all we got to do is win, or are we eliminated? Because there's that 5% chance that could happen. But there's a really good chance that Hal will go into that game saying, hey, all we got to do is win. If we take care of business, we're in the playoffs, and that's all that matters. And so hopefully they'll be in that spot, and we'll see what happens in that district with those games being on either Thursday or Friday night. So again, double check to make sure on all these games because there might be some changes along the way. Moving down to 6-2A, Division 1. This is a district that is coming down to the wire for some of the non-local teams that are in this district. There is an all-Grayson County matchup this week, so we will start there because that makes the most sense. And you have Tioga traveling to Whitewright, 7-2 Tioga, 4-0 in district after they won last week 42-3 against Trenton. And Whitewright is 4-5 and 2-2 after they lost 21-7 against Alvord. So that was the key game last week. We talked about how the winner of that was going to be in line for potentially the second seed. And if you were Whitewright, you had a chance to maybe get the first seed by beating Tioga this week. It didn't happen. Tioga took care of its business in a game that I went to because of the move to Thursday night. And this was a game that, didn't look all that hot. I hate to say all the games in this district at halftime, we were joking that, real defensive battles because it was 7-3, 6-0, and 8-0 in the three games in this district. And Tioga goes and scores first in the first quarter, 7-0. And then Trenton had a 9-minute drive that went nowhere but lasted 9 minutes. And right before halftime, they kick a field goal, so it's 7-3. Trenton's getting the ball to start the second half, and you're like, man, they come out and do something, anything, and they're up 10-7, and now it's really not panic time, but it's like, hey, we got a game because Trenton's trying to make the playoffs. And then Tioga turned it on. They scored 4 times in the third quarter. They ended up getting 6 turnovers in the game, all of them in the second half. One of them on recovering a muffed kick, squib kick to open the third quarter. They got 3 interceptions. 2 fumble recoveries, and they were able to ride, that really good defense to allowing just that field goal in right before halftime. Austin Norwood, 9 carries, 123 yards, and 2 touchdowns. He also threw for 82 yards. Jonah Grubbs, 17 carries for 96 yards and 3 touchdowns. And then Chase Evans finishing it out, 12 carries, 65 yards, and a touchdown. And that's all Tioga needed. So they're locked into the number 1 seed. No matter what happens this week, they've won a district title, first 11-man title in a really long time, since back before they got back at 11-man in 2018. Way back. It's the best season they've had, back since the 30s in terms of 11-man. Obviously, they had really good success right before they moved up to 11-man. About in 2016, 2017 at the 6-man level, but they've solidified their setup, so they're good to go in terms of what they know is going to happen. Whitewright has clinched a playoff spot, so they know that much. But this is a seeding game. If they win, it depends on the Nakona Trenton game because those two are playing each other and. That's a situation where excuse me. Trenton has Tom Bean and Alvord and Nakona play, but Nakona and Trenton are in a battle for the playoff spot. If Nakona somehow upsets Alvord, that could knock Whitewright down to 4th place with the loss. So there's still some moving parts, but they have clinched a playoff spot. They're coming off that loss to Alvord, which unfortunately for them, Alvord got a couple of defensive touchdowns, and and they, when you look at the numbers, you're like, how did Alvord win this game? But that's how they won it. They barely had 180 yards of offense, and they got an interception return for a touchdown early, and then late they got a long fumble return as Whitwright was trying to tie the score at, I guess that would be at 16. I guess they wouldn't have been able to because it would have been, no, it was 14 because, okay, so they were trying to tie the score at 14, and Alvord comes up with another defensive touchdown. Kenneth York led the way for Whitwright, 15 carries, 122 yards. He had the lone touchdown. Jackson Evans chipped in 16 carries for 76 yards. But unfortunately, they came up just short. And again, this is, you look at both of their losses in this district. They lost to Nakona by 7, and they lose a game that, they were down by 7 late against Alvord. So they've been competitive. And so I'm sort of interested to see what this looks like on Friday, because they have been able to hang with everybody in this district, and obviously they've clinched a playoff spot. And I think they obviously want to try to avoid 4th place. But it's going to be interesting to see what happens. I would like to think that Alvord's going to beat Nakona just based on the stuff that we've seen. And if they do that, that clinches the 2nd seed for Alvord. That would clinch. That would set up Whitwright to potentially get the 3rd seed. But again, if they end up in a tie with Nakona, then that could be for the 4th seed. And of course, Trenton's playing Tom Bean, so we could have a potential 3-way tie for 3rd place. But again, just based on the tiebreakers, Whitwright has already clinched its playoff spot, so it doesn't have to worry about that. But Nakona and Trenton are playing to try to get in, and Trenton's got to beat Tom Bean. That's the other game in this district that we have the ties to. Tom Bean 2-7, 0-4. They lost last week, 21-18 against Nakona, and of course Trenton lost 42-3 against Tioga. This was a game for Tom Bean. We talked about it at the beginning of this district. You knew you weren't going to make the playoffs because of the UIL ban. Are you going to play hard? Are you going to show people that we're not going to worry about that? We're just going to go out and play the game on the field that week. And this was a game that Tom Bean led 8-0 at halftime. They led in the second half in this low-scoring weather game. They led 8-7 at halftime. They led 8-7 going to the 4th quarter. You have a chance to pull off the upset. They weren't able to do that. DJ Pearson has 21 carries, 85 yards, has the touchdown run, also ran in the conversion to get it to 8-7. And that was pretty much the bulk of the offense. Only 41 yards passing in this game. So it was a game played in the trenches. Nakona was able to, despite the ability to control the ball with 45 carries to Tom Bean's 27. It took until the 4th quarter for them to find a way to get the lead back after taking a 7-0 lead in the 1st quarter. And so if you're Tom Bean, again, you've got to feel good about your chances to potentially be a spoiler. And Trenton has to win. Trenton's eliminated with a loss or a Nakona win. But you have a chance, obviously, to knock them out of the playoffs with a loss, and give yourself some momentum. Even though, again, you're going into a year next year where you're not going to make the playoffs, but it's about building. This was a team we talked about with Howe coming off the season that they had. Tom Bean has shown the improvement off of last season when they went 0-9, getting shut out all the time. Not playing any competitive games in district play. If you win this game, you get to 3-7. So you go from 0 wins to 3 wins, and then you can talk about, hey, if we're 3-6 or 3-7, can we get to 500? Can we get to 6-4? Can we really be a spoiler next year? Because we know we can't make the playoffs. So it's gonna be. I don't want to call my shot and say this could be an upset, but I think, especially if this is another situation where weather could be a factor, I think Tom Bean's got some confidence going into that, knowing, hey, we want to muck it up, we want to play in cold, rainy wet conditions, and we'll find a way to keep it close, and maybe they can pull out the win. So we'll see what happens there with Tom Bean visiting Trenton on Friday night. And the last game, down in 8-2A Division 2, we have the Collinsville Pirates hosting Chico. Collinsville is 8-1 and 5-0 in district play. They won 25-13 against Munster, and Chico is 2-7 and 1-4 overall. They lost 15-0 against Lindsay. Chico has been eliminated. We talked about last week. Everybody in this district went into last week's games having clinched a playoff spot. We knew it was going to be Collinsville, Santo, Munster, Celeste in some order, and Munster, of course, had the chance, if they would have beaten Collinsville, had a chance to force a three-way tie potentially for the district championship between those three, and then Celeste would have been the 4 seed. Right now, so you have Collinsville. They are locked in, number 1 seed, no matter what happens. The only thing that matters is can they win an outright district championship, which is on the table. Otherwise, they're probably going to share it with Santo. Santo, though, is locked into the 2 seed, and then you have Munster and Celeste, who are tied for 3rd place, and they play each other, so the winner gets the 3rd seed, the loser is getting the 4th seed, so there's a lot at stake in that game. And if you're Collinsville, again, you're in a situation where you're facing a team that's been eliminated. They've struggled to score. Obviously, we saw that last week against Lindsay. How is that going to look for you in terms of, do you want to rest guys? Do you want to how do you want to handle a situation like that, because you know you're the number 1 seed, as opposed to if you had lost last week, you wanted to win this week because you have a chance to get a better seed. You know what your seed is. And then last week you played this was a game again that sort of looked like it had some weather effects to it. So in that game, Logan Jenkins, 13 of 18 passing, 214 yards, did have 2 touchdowns. One of them I saw the video of, and it was one of those, tried to throw it into the wind and it just died, and the kid just caught it as it fell out of the sky. Munster also had 2 interceptions as well, also added a fumble in there. But Jenkins, so he throws 214 yards, does have a touchdown pass, 52 yards to Carter Scott, who ends up with 6 catches for 120 yards and the TD. Jenkins also scored on the ground, short touchdown run. Rylan Newman had a touchdown run late to provide a little bit of a cushion there in the third quarter when it looked like Munster was going to get back in it. This was a game that was 19-7 at halftime. Reed Patterson comes up with a 30-yard interception return. Huge defensive play. So instead of it being 12-7 at halftime, it's 19-7. And then when Munster scores, it's 19-13. And then Collinsville goes back and gets a touchdown. It's 25-13, and nobody's able to do any scoring in the fourth quarter. So, really good win. We've seen obviously the 3 best teams in this district. I think our Collinsville, Santo, and Munster. This was a 12-point margin. The Santo Collinsville game was an 11-point margin, and the Santo Munster game that Munster wasn't able to hang on, that was a 4-point margin. So obviously 3 really good teams. I know Munster's overall record doesn't show that because they played a really tough non-district schedule. They're only 4-5, but Collinsville and Santo are both 8-1, and obviously Santo's loss is to Collinsville. So again, the top 3 in this district are pretty good, and Celeste as a 4 is not too shabby. I got to see them last year when they played Tioga. They've got some playmakers, and they could give somebody a headache in the first round. I haven't looked ahead to the matchups yet, but that's I don't know if I'd want to play Celeste in the first round. They could be pretty dangerous. So again, so you have a Collinsville team that should take care of business, get an outright district title. Finish 9-1 on the season. I'm sure that's what the coaches are telling them over there. Hey, don't look at Chico and say, oh, hey, they're out of it. They're only 2-7. That sort of thing. Go out and play. It's a home game. It's the final home game. It is a 7:00 start. I will mention that it is still set for 7:00 Friday at the time of this recording. And so you've got a chance to go carry that momentum into the playoffs. And I'm sure after they didn't make it last year, they went 4-6 last year, missed out on the playoffs. You've already doubled your win total. Got a chance to add to that. It could be a deep run depending on how things shake out. So maybe they want to keep that momentum going, and I'm sure they do as they host Chico on Friday night as of right now. So again, please double check your games. Don't assume that they're being played on Friday. We've already had games move, so double check. As of the games are on the dates as of this recording. If you do have a Friday game, try to stay dry. I know that was a hard thing to do this last week. Hopefully it's a little easier this week. If it's your team's last game, enjoy that no matter what happens, because there is no tomorrow for them. But enjoy it because we're going to start running out of teams. We're only going to have a handful make it, or I guess maybe it'd be 2 handfuls make the playoffs, and then the deeper we go, I think we've got some teams that are going to make some good runs. But just enjoy it, whether your team just makes the playoffs or ends up going all the way, or gets past Thanksgiving, because that's obviously a goal for a lot of people. But if your team's been eliminated, go out and support them. It's the last game of the season. And I know it may be on a Friday where the weather's bad. But you only get X number of games, whether you're a player or a fan, or you're in the band or a cheerleader or whatever. So make the most out of them as we hit the last week of the regular season for 2022. Thanks for listening as always. Follow me on Twitter. I usually neglect to mention that. At Jason De La Rosa on Twitter. I give you the scores, updates of the games that I'm at, all sorts of stuff. We got volleyball playoffs going on. We got state cross country happening this weekend. We got girls basketball starts this weekend. Boys basketball. There's a lot going on. So check out HeraldDemocrat.com. Follow me on Twitter at Jason De La Rosa. Subscribe to the newspaper. Why not do that? If you subscribe, you can get a digital subscription, so you can read all the stuff online. The social media, the Herald Democrat Facebook, post all the stories and stuff on there. The All-Texomaland page, you can follow that too. There's so many ways to keep up with what's going on. I know it's hectic this time of year. It's hectic for me trying to get everything in, but it's a good time as well because we got a lot of successful programs, whether it's volleyball, kids going down to compete across country, and of course we'll know what the football playoff field looks like after this Friday as well. So again, thanks for tuning in to the Herald Democrat Sports Podcast, and we will talk to you next week.